Om, this word is the whole universe. It is explained that everything past, present and future is the sound Om.
The theologians will now be looking at the 10 metaphors that we find within Hinduism that help us to give us a better understanding of just the mindset and the type of conversations that are had within Hinduism. And so, looking at number one, so number one is Arundhati. So, it kind of sounds kind of fun to say, Arundhati. And within this metaphor that is used, Arundhati, refers to a star. So it's a star that for the Hindus that it helps us to give us an understanding of just the type of indirect speech making that is presented in the Indian thought. And so let me try to give you an example of what this is pointing to. So you see the image that is on the screen of a constellation of stars. And within these constellation of stars, this would be, for us, we would refer to it as the Big Dipper. And so in their conversations, take hypothetically, you have an older sage, a wise person who's instructing then one of his pupils, and as he is beginning to show him about where Arundhati is, he would then begin to point to this constellation of stars. And he would say, okay, so you see the bright star that is there. And he says, yes, I do. Okay, so then look a little bit to the east. And then as the pupil begins to then look to the east, and he says, yes, okay, now I see the star that you're pointing to. And he says, great. Now move a little bit to the north. And as then they begin to observe and looking to the north, and now as they're getting into the grouping of the constellation of these stars here, and it says, okay, so then Arundhati is not any of those bright stars, but it is one that is in between. So getting into this idea of this is how in Indian thought that they're able to have conversations. This is a way that they're directing and not giving anything that is specifically concrete or propositional truths as we like to do, but through story, is through reference by pointing to something that is communicating a reality so that they could get a grasp upon it. And that this kind of characterizes then the rest that we'll go through as we look through them. And as we begin to look through several of these, that there will be similarities. So bear with me as we go through. And so looking at the second one, so the second one is the rope snake analogy. And within this famous rope snake analogy that is often then referred to, and then sometimes they don't even give the full story of it, they just say rope snake. It is a metaphor for the worldview, how we view it falsely at times. And so in this particular analogy, they would talk about how, a person, say that they're camping and they're entering into their tent, and as they're entering into their tent, it's beginning to be dim. The lights are not, they're not around, are on the lights. That the lights, it's dim, and as they enter into their tent, then that there is, they see in the corner that there's something that is coiled up, and so it looks and it appears as a snake. So as they begin to then move towards closely, they have the sense, and they're treating it as if it is, but as they begin to shine the light on the object, they soon realize that it is actually just a rope that is then coiled up. So this is helping for the Hindu thought, this to be able to get into the analogy and understanding that reality is not always what it appears to be. It's not always what it appears to be. And that sometimes that we can live into a reality as if it's true when it's actually not. And we'll see this in a couple of other the metaphors that they use. And then for the third analogy that is talked about sometimes within the Hindu thought is the clay pot. So the clay pot, it represents your life. So the pot itself is your life, it's your body, and that is no different than the Atman in everything else. So it expresses that oftentimes for the Hindu thought that the way that they view the pot and the way that they view the air that is around it, that there's something that is separating the two. And so they would refer to it as this false separatistness type of idea, where once the clay pot is broken, if you were to break then this pot, there would be no difference, that the air that was on the outside and the air that was inside would be the same. It would be the same. This goes back into we talked about in our first video, with just the understanding within Hinduism about the Atman, and then trying to be delivered, so experience moksha from the wheel of samsara. And so once they have escaped the wheel of samsara, then they would be assimilated into Brahman. And this is part of it, because Atman is essentially a part of everything. It's a ta'ama asi. This is the same as that. And that's what we are. So this body, and then once the container is gone, then we realize that we are still a part of the essence of the universe. And then so looking at the the fourth analogy or metaphor that is used is going to be with the monkey and the kitten. And so it sounds cute, right? But in this analogy that is expressed, it helps us to even understand even concepts that we talk about within salvation. They use this analogy to be able to talk about how there is human effort, but there is also the divine. There's a divine action, and then within that divine action, where there is a passivity that the person then takes. So let me show the pictures here. So look at that. It's just a cute cat there carrying her little kitten around. And so in this sense, you would see the cat, that if there was danger that was present, then the mama cat would come along, and then she would, they always got that little extra fur there that they could skin and get picked up by. And so you would have, mama cat, they would come through and then just kind of nibble, pick up that little kitten, and then drag it to safety. So there's no effort that the kitten had to take, right? So it was just there, probably didn't even realize that there was danger. And then so you had the mama cat who came and then picked it up and took it out of danger. So that's what they would use as an example to show about, human effort. So human effort at times where there is a passivity to it. There's often that we are not participating, and yet things are happening. Where on the other side, that there is times of needing to take action. So say same situation where there is danger that is present, and that you would have then the mama, they would come by, in this case looking at this monkey, and then as she passes by the younger, well, that younger little monkey there, he better grab on for dear life, otherwise he's going to be left behind. And so there's effort that needs to be taken, and so you have the monkey then that then grabs on. So this is, again, seeing the difference between the two. We would talk about this in terms of, maybe the difference between Arminianism and Calvinism. Where is there the divine agent with God and his interaction with his creation in bringing deliverance and salvation? Where on the other side, where those are saying, we have to have an active participation in salvation. So the necessity for divine grace and human effort expressed with this analogy with the monkey and the kitten. For the next one, number 5, with the grieved man concerning his son. The number 5, the grieved man concerning his son, that again it goes back into what we have mentioned even with Arundhati and the rope snake, where there is a sense in how we view reality may not always be what actually is, and that we could then we could create in our minds, we could create a type of world based upon how we respond to certain situations that may not actually be true. So the point to the gap between our mental world and the actual reality that is present in the world, where you have that our minds have the ability to create distress or joy in us. We cannot assume that the emotions of our lives or mental qualities of our mind do in fact correspond to the actual world. So when we, thinking in this situation, that the metaphor that they use is, that a father, he receives word about his son, that his son has reposed, and that the man, then the father, he grieves for the loss of his son, the news that he's received. And then he comes to find out that his son is actually alive. So the grief that he experienced, the emotions that he went through with the initial news was in his mind and how he responded to the situation. And then when he found out that that was not actually the reality, then he had joy. So that, and again, so saying that within ourselves that we could create this reality. And I'm going to play a little video where we find this taking place. Maybe you've seen this. This is Nanny McPhee, part 2. So I'll play a little scene on here.
Here he is with a silly contract. Oh, wait, that looks more like a letter. Norman, Megsy, Uncle Phil's got a letter for us.
Oh, a letter from Rory. That'd be nice after all their waiting.
That's not a letter, dear. It's yellow. It's a telegram.
What's that?
From the War Office.
That's not for us, is it?
That's not always bad news, is it? I mean, we've got to have a little faith, haven't we? Oh.
Mum? Kilwood in action.
I'm sorry.
So in this story, you have then the uncle who is he's being the bearer of bad news, and he's bringing it to the family. It's his sister-in-law, but the backstory to it, if you haven't seen it, is that he actually got into some debt, a gambling debt, and he's trying to then sell off his brother's farm so he could be able to pay off that debt. And what a low, it's such a low blow here for this guy, that he sinks to the level of being able to then falsify a document stating that his brother has died in action. And as the movie continues on to show that that's not actually true. But seeing the response, we have the family that is grieving, they're trying to make sense of what is going on in the world, and that they're living within that reality, which is in fact not the truth. So this is one of the metaphors that are used. And then for number 6, so the painted canvas, where the world is re-emitted and contracted into a never-ending cycle of birth and rebirth. So this goes back to like the wheel of samsara, where you have within this painted canvas, and then we have to give a little illustration to show you here in the imagery of what they're referring to. Because when I think of painted canvas, I'm not really seeing the never-ending cycle of birth and rebirth. But if we're talking more like a scroll, like a painting that you can roll up, in that sort of canvas, then it makes a little bit more sense of what they're pointing to and how it gets into this never-ending cycle. So that they would say that even if the world has a beginning and it has an end, that that doesn't mean that the beginning and the end can't go through certain cycles. And within the cycles, that if you have these canvases, like you see in the picture here, each of them are rolled up, and then as they're unrolling, that is going through a cycle, and then there can be another canvas that is then unrolled. So this beginning and the end of recycling, wheel of samsara, being able to experience moksha at the end. And then for number 7, the dirty mirror. Again, this kind of goes back to the grief man, goes back to the snake that is coiled up, snake rope, and the way that we view reality again, so that we look through this dirty mirror. So kind of reminds us that Paul says something similar in First Corinthians chapter 13 on the chapter on love in the introduction. And that he says that we don't see clearly, we see through this dim glass. And in a similar way, where this is what the Hindus talk about, that the way that we perceive reality, the way that we perceive ourselves is only in part. It's only in part. Now, for Hindus, they would say that the reason for this has to do with karma, so that karma has so encrusted our lives that we are unable to actually see the true nature of ourselves. Now, we would say that because of sin, the way that sin has affected the way that we think, affected the way that we feel and we interact with the world, that we do not have a proper vision of reality. We don't have a proper vision of God, and therefore we don't have a proper vision of ourselves, and that we need to be able to understand, to see what is humanity, what is the goal of humanity, what are we supposed to be aiming for. And we'll see this in Unit 6 when we start talking about Christology, that is the goal of humanity. We see humanity perfectly in Jesus. So the dirty mirror, as we begin then to move through our lives, and we begin to take off this crust, we begin to take off the dirt. And the way to do this for Hindus is by following certain yoga. And as I had mentioned before, yoga is more of a philosophy than it is exercises that a lot of people engage in. And so you fall on a certain path to this enlightenment, and it involves essentially removing the dust, removing the dirt from the mirror so that you can then see your Atman properly. And you can see that your Atman is a part of the universe, it's a part of the Brahman. It goes back to then the concept with the clay pot, that the Ta'ama Asi, that what is that is also that. Outside of it, it's the same thing. And so this is the crust that we're taking off, the dirt, and trying to be enlightened, to come to this understanding that we are to be assimilated within the universe, within the Brahman. And then number 8, the hidden treasure. The hidden treasure is, and these next two, and the seed and the egg, they kind of follow examples that we would probably be familiar with as we read through the Gospels and the parables of the hidden treasure. So it has the same concept, that there is a true reality and there's a true treasure, that if we exert our effort and we exert our time and our resources, then we would be able to find the true nature of reality. For us, it is the kingdom of God. This is what Jesus points us to, that it is like a mystery, and that it is so valuable and precious that while many are storing up treasures in this life, but Christ points us that there is a greater treasure that waits in heaven, one that surpasses anything that we can accumulate in this world. And so within this hidden treasure for the Hindus, they remove the impediments, that you're striving to move and seek and find this hidden treasure. And so you're removing then the problems that impede you from seeing the true nature of reality, so that you can get to the true hidden treasure of the self, which goes back to then the same thing, like the dirty mirror, trying to understand your Atman, trying to understand the Tatmasi, trying to escape the wheel of samsara, to be assimilated into the Brahman. You're in one essence with the universe. So it has the same trajectory that is there. And then for number 9, with the seed and the egg. So a little seed, like an acorn, becomes a mighty oak tree. So we have the same type of parable that Jesus tells about where you have the mustard seed and then it grows into this full bloom tree. And then you have, the birds and everything that are nesting in it. And then he says that this is like the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God starts off small and then it grows. Let's talk about the 3 categories of Hinduism that we find. And so the first one is that we find that the way of knowledge, it focuses on how to teach people and train people to have the insight of the Vedas and the Upanishads, to experience their oneness with Brahman and release from the wheel of samsara, so as we had mentioned already. And that there's actually then there are 6 major schools of philosophy in Hinduism, which from then their beginning of this philosophy, there are various, branches that occur. And when we begin to look then more of what the popular Hinduism is, they have 2 main expressions. So the first one, that there are 2 ways, or there's 2 paths. So there's the way of action and the way of works, maybe representing of how we had the monkey and the kitten. These 2 paths, one of a passive approach, and then the other one where you're actively working. And then there is the way of devotion. So the way of action or works is something that is shared by all Hindus, even those that are part ultimately of the philosophical branch. It underscores the importance of certain social actions or works that are important in the Hindu worldview. For example, the duty of the caste system that is in place. And so just to think about that a little bit, just with the caste system, where there is an image, and I'll put it up here, and where you begin to then see that this is Brahman that is represented with various aspects, and it looks like he has a remote in his hand there and a flower. But within this imagery, where the head itself represents the elites. So the elites, and there's only 8%. So 8% of those who in this caste system will be within this category. And then you have the warriors, which are then represented with the arms. And these warriors then, they represent 15% of the caste system. And then for the third, you have the midsection of the body. And that this then is representing the merchants. So now you get into the lower class here, those in business. And that this would be then 9%, represents 9%. And then the next lower division will be the servants. The servants then are represented by the feet, and that the servants then represent 29%. They're 29% for those in the caste system. And then the rest are referred to then as the outcast. So they're the outcasts who have really no place, those who are the ones that these people who disobeyed various caste rules and were thrown out of the caste system, and they are no longer can participate in any privileges in Indian society. And that represents nearly half of the Indian population. So going back to our terminology here and looking at just the numbers represented, and I think I said 29% on the servants, but actually 2 there, as you can see. The third branch within Hinduism overall, but the second within popularity, is the philosophical way of knowledge. So then popular is subdivided into the way of action and the way of devotion, which is, comparatively speaking, a rather late development within Hinduism. So this is a reaction, actually, to the developments within Buddhism. So to be devoted or devotion is a very dominant theme within the modern day in Hinduism because of what it means is that in order to achieve salvation or moksha through a release from the wheel of samsara and the terrible cycle of birth and rebirth, you must devote yourself to a particular deity. So it could be a god or a goddess. So there are literally millions of gods to worship in India. So there are believed to be over 330 million different gods worshipped in India. So one person cannot worship 330 million gods. So the way of devotion argues that a person simply needs to devote themselves fully to a particular deity, a particular god. And through worshiping that god, that becomes a pathway to salvation. So again, maybe we can even use this as a starting point where, and I think they even have a god that is represented with Jesus, obviously different, and if this is the same concept, we would say one particular god, but that there is only one God. Now that there is one among various options to give devotion to, but it could be a starting point to be able to have a conversation with someone.